Welcome to our third part. On this one, since I don't have a file for you guys to start off with, we're going to make some very simple parts to begin with, and then we're going to cover some topics in making assemblies for the CSWA practice. So to make these parts, we're going to make just a simple base and then a link for a chain, and then we're going to add those together to show some of the tools that we can use inside the assembly to make sure we're working quickly for our CSWA. So go ahead and start by creating a part. I'm an inch, pound, second. I'm going to start by sketching on the front plane. I'm going to make a center point rectangle, just practicing some of the topics that we talked about before. I want to make the width of this 1 inch. Feel free to pause the video at any time if you need more time to work on these. And then a height of 1/2 inch. I'm going to accept that. I'm going to extrude this to a width of 2 inches. And again, I'm going to use the mid-plane extrude so that way the center of my part is in the middle of that base. This can become a base that we can attach a link on later. And then I'm going to sketch on the edge of this part. And I'm going to draw a tombstone shape. The tombstone shape is very common on CSWA. We're just going to come up, come around, try and get that lined up as close as we can to the original geometry. And again, remember, you're going to end back where you started. I didn't get all the relations I wanted inside that, so I'm going to make this line vertical. And I want to make sure that this circle is the correct height and it has the tangent relation. So I'm just going to check that by moving it around, seeing what it looks like, and then adding my tangent relation. And I just need to specify the height of this. The width should be defined by the width of my original base. So I'm going to make this 1 inch tall. And then I'm also going to add a hole that goes through the center, since this is already a pretty simple part. And I'll make that hole have a diameter of 1/2 inch. I'm going to extrude that part out. I'm going to flip the direction. I'm going to have it go 1/4 inch. And then I'm going to mirror that onto the opposite side just by control clicking the boss extrude and the front plane, clicking on the mirror, and then clicking on accept. Now I've got a simple bracket that I can use to start my assembly. I'm going to save this as base just to my desktop. If your desktop is cluttered, has a lot of files on it, you see mine does as well. You might want to make a subfolder just so your assembly files don't get confused with the other files. If you have files with the same name, obviously that's going to cause issues. So I'm going to save that as base. I am recording, right? Yeah, okay, good. I wasn't sure if I was recording, so just checking quick. And now I'm going to make one more part a link. And again, I'm going to start by sketching on the front plane. I'm going to use a slot tool to create a very simple chain link. I'll make it have a radius of 0.25, a length of 1 inch, and then 2 holes that both have a diameter of 0.25. Again, making sure you keep track of radius and diameter is very important. Again, I'm going to mid-plane extrude this just because it's good practice to do that. I'm going to make it 1/2 inch wide. Now I've got my link. Again, saving that to the desktop. If you have the parts already open, then starting with whatever part is your origin part, your base part, which I named base, is a little bit easier because it's going to want to use that. You can do make assembly from part, and it's going to assume that that's the part you want to use. If you don't already have it made, I wouldn't bother opening it. I would just use the browse options to identify the part in the assembly once the assembly is made. As soon as this is loaded up, you see I have the base opened already there, so it's selected. If you don't have it there, that means the part's not open. Just use browse, select on the part, hit open. Do not click on the workspace. For your first part, you're almost always going to want to click on the green check mark, and that's going to align the origin of your first part with the origin of your assembly. And it's also going to fix that part in place, so it's not going to be free to rotate around. All of the subsequent parts that you're going to add to your assembly, I would typically suggest you just drag them in from wherever the folder that you have. In this case, I'm just going to drag in one of my links, and that's because I want to show you guys an additional tool that can be helpful if you have a lot of repeated geometry inside your parts. So first thing, number one, make sure that first part is loaded in using that green check mark. That is going to be your number one source of errors. Make sure that the origin is in the right spot. Make sure your axes are aligned the way they're specified inside the exam. If they're not, you're going to have a lot of issues with that. The next thing I want to do is most of the time in CSWA, your mates are very simple. So you're going to have just simple coincident mates, offset mates, angle mates, and concentric mates. So a coincident mate, again, we just have the point here, the origin selected. I'm going to unselect that one. So hit delete. Is typically just two faces. I really recommend you use faces rather than lines whenever possible, because it's going to be less defining in terms of setting things up. And so you're going to have less problems with over-defined assemblies later on if you do that. So there's your coincident. I can also just use an offset using maybe say a 1/2 inch. I can put it wherever I want inside there. You can flip these around so I can change the direction of the distance. Just like that. Or I can also flip the alignment. So I want them going in or out. Just make sure you have it set up the way you want it to be. So I'll make this 0.25 inches offset right now. It's going to center it a little bit inside my part. You can also use advanced mates to automatically center them, although you typically don't see that on CSWA, more of a CSWP. Once you've got that set up, you can go ahead and add the next mate. You need to click on the green check mark to accept the first mate, and then you can start adding more. Again, so here's a concentric mate. And then maybe I have some angle between this part and this part. And it's going to default to these other relationships. You got to decide which ones do you want. The coincident obviously can't obtain that because those two things are not able to line up. So if I try and add that one, it's going to complain. But angles are also fairly easy to define. So we can define those however we want them to be. Do make sure that if you're defining like angles like that, that you actually type in the value that you want and you get the value you want for those, and that they're preserved. If you get something you don't want, I suggest you exit the mate tool, come down to your mate options, find the one you want to edit, and then edit that one. It can be fairly difficult to manage that from down here. So if I wanted this to be, say, 45 degrees, I can add those in. Next thing I want to show you guys real quickly is just using the copy with mates feature. So if I have one part in a chain, or if I have, say, I'm adding a lot of screws or a lot of pins or something else to a component, if I right click on that component, there's this option to copy with mates. And then you can specify what you want to copy. And the hard thing here is that most of the time in SolidWorks, when you look at features, you click on the green check mark to accept what you want to do. Some of these features, they have multiple options that are kind of nested together, and you have to use these little arrows. So I click on the thing I want to copy, and then I move over and it says, okay, well, what do you want to use for each of the mates that are inside that part? So I can see the 3 mates that are on that original part. And then I can say, okay, well, where do you want the coincident to be? Okay, well, I can make the next link come out here. Where do you want the concentric to be? Okay, I want it to be here. Where do you want the angle to be? Okay, I can have it be here. And I can do that for that first part. And I can do it again and again and again and again and again and again to get as many links as I want. And again, so I can do this very quickly to get a lot of links added to this part without having to worry about kind of manually pulling in each of the parts one by one. And then even if you don't want to use the same values for all of those, after you have it done, we can just exit to leave that last one out. I can change any of these angles after the fact. Or if you wanted to, you could do all the links without the angles and then add the angles in as a secondary operation. Again, just fast ways of getting multiple parts. You can also mirror parts inside assemblies. So if I had the same geometry here and I just wanted to copy it over onto the other side, I could take these parts here, select them and the feature that I wanted to mirror about, and I can mirror those components to get them on the opposite side. Again, to get very quick replicates of geometry when you have that symmetry. Same thing with patterns and circular patterns. You can pull those in so that way you don't have to have as many things set up. Now, one of the things that's going to be, you got to be a little careful about those is that those mirrors are not going to have their own angles. So you won't be able to adjust the positions of those independent of the ones on the right. So if you need to have them move in a way that the left side and the right side don't move in the same direction at the same time, then that's not going to work. But another thing you can do is if you don't like dragging and dropping things in, you can always copy just using Control-C by clicking on the part and then pasting the part in. And that's going to make copies of those parts. And then you can just move those parts around to get them. If you can't select a part because it's inside something else, or you just don't know which one it is, because I have a bunch of links on here, you can always go into the move component. If I click on the part and then move component, I don't actually have to click on the part to move it. I can just click anywhere on the screen and it'll move it. Right. So hopefully that's helpful. And good luck on the CSWA.